Ready to call to order the 105th meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission at the Heinz Auditorium in Boston. Today is January 29th. The principal item on our agenda, is this today? Yes, the 29th.
January 28th.
28th, I'm sorry. Take that back. Let's make it the 104th meeting of the Gaming Commission. And I think we are going to go straight to our principal item, which agenda item, which is going to be orchestrated by Ombudsman Ziemba. And we have some scheduling rearranging here to do, but John, why don't you take the lead?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. So today we've invited a number of communities that have petitioned to be surrounding communities, venues that have petitioned to become impacted live entertainment venues, and applicants to provide additional testimony to the Commission regarding the petitions as I just discussed. We have sent out an email to all of the ones that I just mentioned, telling them that we are hoping that we would get approximately 15 minutes of testimony from each side. If there is involuntary disbursement petition, we've asked that they could also get an additional 5 minutes to their 15 minutes of testimony. All sides have been notified that what we're hoping to hear about are impacts or potential lack of impacts as we begin our reviews or as we continue our reviews of these petitions. There's been obviously a significant number of interactions between these parties, and a lot of that detail is included in the petitions, and that detail can be useful to us when we take a look at the demonstration of public outreach and other activities, but for the purposes of today, for determining whether or not surrounding communities or venues are impacted live entertainment venues, we're hoping to just really understand some of the impacts. Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, we have changed a little bit of our order. So I think we're going to start, in general, what we're doing is we're starting with the MGM-related petitioners. Then we're going to segue shortly after the lunch break into the impacted live entertainment venue petitioners for all of the applicants. And then finally for today, we're going to go into the Mohegan Sun petitioners and presentations by the applicant. Tomorrow we will conclude the Mohegan Sun petitioners and applicant presentations, and we will finish with the WIN applications and applicant responses. That's consistent with the order that we did pursuant to our coin flip. So I'd like to call both, we have the applicant represented to my right, and I will call Northampton to come down and sit here. I will let actually the applicant introduce its team, but if I could please have the representatives from Northampton, Mr. Jeff Fialke and Mayor David Narkowitz and Michael DeOlo from Comoin Associates to please join where I sit right now, and I will vacate the premises. But the order of presentations is that we have a presentation first by the community, and then we have the response by the applicant.
You want to introduce your team?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Seth Stratton. I'm an attorney with Fitzgerald Attorneys at Law in East Long Meadow. We're local counsel to MGM. Sitting to my left is a face with whom all of you are familiar, Mr. Michael Mathis, who's the incoming president of MGM Springfield. We also have with us today Kelly Tuckey, sitting behind me, who's vice president of community and public affairs for MGM. Also with us on our team today is Kevin Dandrade. He's a principal with TEC, and I believe he's been before the commissioners previously. He's our traffic consultant and will be addressing some of the traffic impacts today. Sitting to my right is Jen Nozel, co-counsel on these surrounding community and ILEV petitions from Brown Rundick. We also have with us, sitting behind me is Sarah Maggie Morin. Sarah, though not speaking today, is a resident of Long Meadow, entrepreneur and mother, and is available should the commission seek to have any questions for her about the impact to Long Meadow.
About motherhood?
Sorry, about the positive impacts to Long Meadow.
All right.
Fair point. Chuck Irving is here with us as well. Chuck is our local development partner of Davenport Properties. Also joining us is Edward Pakula, city solicitor for the city of Springfield. And finally, a face with whom you're all very familiar, Marty Anastasia of Brown Rudnick. There are several other members on our team supporting us here as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the Northampton team just needs a couple minutes to get their multimedia equipment ready. So
Okay.
for time purposes, perhaps I could do some of the introductions now.
Good.
For all of the members, and then we can just simply call them up when they're ready.
Great.
Great. So for Hamden today, we're joined by John Flynn, Board of Selectmen, and Vincent Villamano, also from the Board of Selectmen. Excuse that pronunciation. And from Long Meadow, we have Brandon Moss, Stephen Crane, Long Meadow Town Manager, and Marie Angelides, Chair of the Long Meadow Select Board. I also wanted to mention that we have Gary Rue from the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, and Jason DeGray from Greenman Peterson, Inc., also in attendance. They aren't part of the testifying order, but they have offered to be in attendance and answer any questions that the commission may ask. As you recall, we asked the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission to conduct and oversee an independent traffic analysis that was done by GPI. We're reviewing those results as part of our evaluation of these applications, and they've graciously said that they would be available to answer any questions that we may have. And then we have representatives from Eastern States Exposition, Eugene Cassidy, Chief Executive Officer of Eastern States Exposition, Majestic Theater, Danny Eaton, President of Majestic Theater, and Todd Cadis, Treasurer of Majestic Theater. So I'll go check to see if our Northampton representatives have their equipment ready. I'm sorry, we apologize for the switch in the order. We just want to give the team a couple minutes to get their materials ready.
John, should we do Eastern States while we're waiting? Or-
Jill, do we have the Eastern States folks here?
Okay. All right, we'll just wait. That's all right. We'll just take a quick break if you guys just want to, sorry for the mix-up, but just shouldn't be more than 5 minutes. It's not fair to push them, so we have to do that. Let's do that. Let's just take a 10-minute break and be clear about it. Thank you, Mr. Mathis.
Thank you.
By the way, just to clarify, this was the 104th meeting, and this was the 28th, not the 29th. That was a mistake when I started. Gentlemen from Northampton, you're on first. Apologize for the confusion. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Jeffrey Fialki. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Bacon Wilson. It is my pleasure today to represent the City of Northampton as petitioner for designation as a surrounding community and as applicant for involuntary disbursement. Each such petition pertaining to the gaming application of Blue Tarp Redevelopment LLC, an affiliate of MGM Springfield, for the gaming development project to be located in the City of Springfield. I am joined here today by the Mayor of Northampton, David Narkowitz, to my right, as well as by Michael Andolo, the Vice President of Camoin Associates, to his right. By way of introduction, as I'm sure Mr. Andolo will elaborate in a few minutes, and as you've seen in the city's brief, Camoin Associates is an economic research firm that was retained by the City of Northampton to assist in the city's analysis of the potential economic and fiscal impacts of the MGM gaming development on the City of Northampton. In its petitions, the city's provided the commission nearly 70 pages of briefs, argument, and economic data. It's not our intention today to reiterate those arguments, but rather to highlight and to underscore the basis for the city's position, namely that the City of Northampton should be designated a surrounding community pursuant to the Gaming Act with respect to the MGM development. Unlike many other communities throughout the Commonwealth that have petitioned for surrounding community designation, Northampton, located approximately 18 miles north of the proposed MGM development, does not claim to be burdened by impacts on transportation infrastructure or traffic. Rather, the city believes it will be economically impacted as a result of the casino operations. Specifically, Northampton anticipates a substantial and definitive impact on its finances and its local business due to the erosion of Northampton's status as a sole destination market in the Pioneer Valley, which forms the core and the fabric of its economy. Understanding the city's position in this regard is predicated upon a familiarity and an understanding of the uniqueness of the City of Northampton. Northampton is widely acknowledged as the premier cultural and visitation destination in the Pioneer Valley, attracting residents, students, visitors, and tourists for varied offerings from art galleries, distinctive retail stores, renowned restaurants, high-quality entertainment and music venues, as well as boutique hotels. The city's received dozens of national awards, distinguishing its unique character, its charm, and its economic success in an otherwise often economically challenged region. To frame that context, we'd request your indulgence. We've got a short video, runs a little bit over 3 minutes. The video is prepared by the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism. Assuming our technology is kind enough to cooperate, it's brought to us today courtesy of YouTube. As a caveat, the video, while focuses primarily on Northampton, nonetheless makes reference to a couple of landmarks located in the neighboring communities of Holyoke and Amherst. If we could cue the video.
Northampton is a charming and lively town in the foothills of the Berkshires, bordered by the Connecticut River. Northampton offers a wide variety of rural beauty, as well as an energetic downtown and nightlife. The neighboring community is often called the Five College area, due to the close proximity of Mount Holyoke, Smith, Amherst, and Hampshire College, as well as the University of Massachusetts in the town of Amherst. Northampton has many attractions of historic significance, including the Emily Dickinson Museum in Amherst. Here, you'll find the homestead where the poet was born and lived most of her life. The Academy of Music in Northampton is of historic interest and home to various first-class theatrical, musical, and dance performances. The Calvin Theater, an old movie cinema, is nowadays a grand music hall. Looks can be deceiving. It holds more people than you'd expect and plays host to big names like B.B. King and James Taylor. For those who crave adventure in the great outdoors, take in Northampton's scenic views from the mountains, rivers, parks, and trails that are open to the public. Mount Tom State Reservation in Holyoke offers 2,082 acres of parks and wildlife sanctuary. The hiking and walking trails lead to the top of Mount Tom, which offers a beautiful backdrop for pictures and picnicking. Northampton is the hub for a top culinary experience in the Pioneer Valley. The variety of restaurants makes it easy to fit any budget. Visit the microbreweries or stop at a cafe for a delicious coffee. Spoleto Restaurant on Main Street, pronounced Spoleto by many, is a favorite among visitors and locals. Northampton Brewery is the oldest operating brew pub in New England. They offer meals and snacks as well as their famous beer. Enjoy the rooftop beer garden for a summer evening under the stars. The Thorns Marketplace was once an upscale department store. Now it's a downtown shopping hub filled with retail stores and cafes. Downtown Northampton's variety of galleries attracts artists from all over. One of the most interesting collections of jewelry and crafts is in the Don Mueller Gallery. A visit to Northampton is not complete without staying at the Hotel Northampton. This elegant and exquisite building has hosted visitors such as Eleanor Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, and JFK. It's filled with antiques and elegant furnishings. Visit Wiggins Tavern for a drink and learn about its interesting 200-year-old story. Northampton offers a variety of activities and restaurants to entertain everyone. Be sure to visit the Northampton Chamber of Commerce website for up-to-date information about festivals and happenings.
Thank you. As you're aware from the city's petition, Northampton's argument recognizes that the MGM development may well provide tangible economic benefits to the city of Springfield and perhaps serve as a development catalyst for Springfield. All very positive outcomes for a city that's been economically challenged for decades. But unfortunately, the clear, albeit perhaps unintended result of Springfield's gain will be Northampton's loss. As you'll hear in greater detail from Mr. Rendolo shortly, the Northampton derives a great deal of its customers from the greater Springfield market. For decades, Northampton has been the sole destination in the Pioneer Valley for a day of shopping or for a night out in the town. Thus, the new MGM development, complete with its proposed retail, hotel, restaurant, entertainment, and other amenities, whether by design or by effect, will ultimately compete directly against the basis of Northampton's small business economy. Northampton does not argue that its entire customer base will be lost to MGM. However, the Camoin report nonetheless shows that substantial patronage will indeed be cannibalized, resulting in significant lost sales, lost jobs, and current and future tax revenue. Moreover, Northampton will not derive any benefit from the MGM development, which, consistent with longstanding casino industry practices, seeks to provide one-stop shopping restaurant, retail, and entertainment amenities, all of which would result in a de facto disincentive for out-of-town casino patrons to visit other entertainment and retail venues, much less other destination communities such as Northampton. And while MGM has made overtures of cross-promotion between the two cities, as our brief details, token offers such as the inclusion of Northampton brochures at the MGM concierge desk can hardly be expected to offset MGM's vested interest in attracting and retaining destination consumers as a draw to its gaming operations versus sending them off to Northampton to enjoy similar entertainment amenities. Rather, Northampton will need to undertake costly new and continued valley-wide marketing efforts to retain customers and businesses. These new advertising expenses will become a new necessity of the city's economic survival. And in addition, Northampton will be challenged to replace tax and fee revenue lost to business contraction. MGM's position is and has been that Northampton is not entitled to surrounding community status by arguing that the city is not sufficiently proximate to the site of the proposed MGM development to be adversely impacted. However, MGM then conceded in its opposition brief that Northampton would indeed benefit from the MGM development by the increase of out-of-state tourists and international student visitation. Naturally, MGM's argument is one of convenience, claiming that while Springfield and Northampton are too geographically distant to negatively impact each other, they are nonetheless proximate enough to positively impact each other. Rather, Northampton's position is that mileage from the proposed gaming establishment alone, while instructive, cannot be the dispositive factor in determining proximity, especially in light of the resultant impacts, and particularly in western Massachusetts, where the population is simply less concentrated than the eastern part of the Commonwealth, such that lengthy travel times for restaurants, for leisure, and for entertainment are commonplace, and such that the economic markets of Springfield and Northampton are intricately connected. As the Commission is also aware, MGM has entered into a surrounding community agreement with the City of Holyoke, which, while bordering the City of Northampton, does not share a common border with the City of Springfield. In addition, Springfield and Northampton share a common transportation and tourism infrastructure. Both are served by the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority as their mass transportation provider. Further, they're both represented in the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, and the Greater Springfield Convention and Visitors Bureau promotes regional tourism, including both Northampton and Springfield. This demonstrates that Northampton and Springfield share common economic ties and that their infrastructure and their tourism industries are directly linked. Lastly, the city has additionally petitioned for involuntary disbursement to reimburse both the city's expenses in conducting the Camoin economic study that you'll further hear discussed in a moment, as well as the legal fees incurred by Northampton in this regard. The city has submitted a comprehensive brief. We've submitted data and supporting materials together with that application and petition. And for the reasons that are further set forth in those materials, Northampton requests the Commission find that, one, there is a substantial likelihood that Northampton will be designated a surrounding community for the reasons that are set forth in the brief and for the reasons that are discussed today. And then number two, the Camoin Associates study was both reasonable and necessary to provide objective data regarding economic impacts, rather than the city having relied upon its own anecdotal evidence, conjecture, and its own opinion. And lastly, that the legal services performed by the law firm of Bacon Wilson were both reasonable and necessary to adequately represent the city's interests in this regard. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Mayor of Northampton, David Narkowitz.
Good morning, Chairman Crosby and members of the Commission. Thank you very much for this opportunity to
Turn the mic
into a microphone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to testify. I'm here obviously representing the City of Northampton. I hope you had a chance to study the videotape that we showed, because really I'm also here representing the owners of those 67 retail businesses, including over 34 restaurants. These are local independent businesses who've worked decades to create the success that we have in Northampton. We are a retail, shopping, a dining, an entertainment destination for the Pioneer Valley. 10-minute drive, 20-minute drive from Springfield. I know they're going to focus a lot on that 18 miles. I fully expect there'll be a virtual demonstration of how many poker chips you can stack to form 18 miles. But what you really need to focus on is the economic impact, which is what your gaming regulations speak to. We believe that as an established regional destination that is generating significant revenues in terms of meals tax, hotel, motel, in terms of job creation, in terms of attracting visitors from throughout the Pioneer Valley, that we will be impacted by this $800 million entertainment facility that will be 20 minutes from the city of Northampton. So I hope you will give consideration to our petition. We went a step further because I understand that we have a disagreement with MGM around this, and I think that our attorney said it best. On the one hand, they assert that they will provide economic benefit to the city of Northampton, 20 minutes away. Although that benefit is somewhat undefined, it's a $50 million benefit to the region without a lot of specific data on what the benefit specifically will be to Northampton. We would assert that If there can be benefits 20 minutes south on 91, that surely there are potential negative impacts. So I went to my city council. They gave me the authority to appropriate funds to hire a consultant so that we could provide some independent data to the committee about what the potential economic and financial impacts are to the city of Northampton. So I'm going to turn it over now to Michael Donolo from Camoin Associates, who's going to give you an overview of the results of that study that I just referenced.
It was a 15-minute, it's been about 15 minutes, so if not too terribly long here.
I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I'm not sure I'll be able to meet that time frame. I'll try to respect the time, but I can do what I can do. I did pass out copies of PowerPoint. I'm not sure that you received them, but I did give copies out. But you may reference, of course, this screen here. I'm Michael Indolo from Camoin Associates. We're an economic consultancy based in Saratoga Springs. Camoin Associates has done many of these analyses, including hundreds of millions of dollars of CapEx into major league sports arenas, into convention centers, into casinos, into all types of tourism destination facilities, and many other things. I've spoken on the matter at state-level conferences. I've authored articles. I've authored topic papers. And our work has been highlighted in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and NPR Marketplace, et cetera, et cetera. So we're known for these types of analyses. Next slide, please. Briefly, I'm just going to outline the analytic framework behind the impact analysis. The existing conditions have already largely been discussed. We'll talk about the topic of competition from the casino, how we estimated our impacts, and our major conclusions. Next slide, please. So to put it in the simplest terms possible, our analysis concludes that some of what is spent in the casino will in fact come from recreational spending that occurs currently in the city of Northampton. We have a term, economists have a term called discretionary income, which is essentially what is left over out of a household's income after you pay for the essentials, which is taxes, shelter, clothing, food, right? And a portion of that discretionary income is spent on recreational spending. Now that spending is fungible, which means to say that there's a substitution effect. You can substitute one type of recreation spending for another type of recreation spending. In fact, MGM explicitly acknowledges this in its opposition brief, and here I'm referencing Exhibit B, page 3 of that brief. I quote, "A literature review of studies of the impact of casinos found that the development of new casinos can replace other entertainment spending in the region," end quote. We are, of course, in agreement with this, as is something that we have found in many of the studies that we have done in the past. So what, again, is happening, what we believe will happen, is a substitution of casino spending for spending at non-casino venues that are currently happening in Northampton. This is a kind of a logic, a common sense sort of logic that I'm sure you can appreciate and understand. Northampton, in losing its patronage, businesses are going to have to lay off workers, some of the businesses are going to close, and unfortunately that will erode Northampton's status as a tourism destination site in the region. The question is how much, and that's what our analysis looked at. So the next slide, please. Here you have a map, and I just direct your attention to the map. In green is the city of Northampton. In orange is a trade area. We call it the Northampton Trade Area. It's a 25-minute drive time. As mentioned by both the mayor and by legal counsel, Northampton is known as tourism destination. 500,000 residents 500,000 visitors come in and spend time there. MGM explicitly acknowledges the fact of the tourism destination status. I'm referencing page 5 of the opposition brief, quoting, "MGM Springfield has long recognized that Northampton is an important regional tourist destination," end quote. Our analysis confirms this characterization. On page 10 of our report, we show empirically and factually there's a retail surplus within the city. A retail surplus is when you have more being spent at businesses than residents spend. So for example, under the full-service restaurant category, we showed a total of $35 million in business at Northampton at Northampton establishments. However, empirically, residents of Northampton are only spending about $21 million on full-service restaurants. Therefore, there's a surplus of $14 million. Well, where's that coming from? That's coming from outside the city into the city. We have all these different categories that each are tens of millions of dollars, and you can tell very, very clearly that millions of dollars are coming in based on the entertainment venue and other amenities of the area. The next slide, please. I've now overlaid, and this is kind of an important slide to understand methodologically, the orange in the middle, of course, is overlaid by a blue area. This is the casino trade area. It's a 60-minute drive time from the casino. Excuse me. We were not provided by a market analysis by MGM, but we found one that had been previously done by Strategic Market Advisors. They define this 20-minute drive time as a combination of the primary and secondary market trade areas, and according to Strategic Market Advisors, represents 77% of the patrons of the casino. So while the casino may draw from further away than this 60-minute drive time here, this is, essentially its primary and secondary trade areas. MGM explicitly states in its opposition brief, page 6, quoting, MGM Springfield explained its marketing plan and projections, which were based on bringing up to 50% of its customers from outside Western Massachusetts. So if up to 50% of its customers are coming from outside Western Massachusetts, then by definition, 50% and possibly much more are coming from within Western Massachusetts. This is consistent with Strategic Market Advisors' report and certainly with our findings. There's a couple of points to consider here that are real important. As we noted on page 2 and 3 of our report, as more and more casinos are developed in the Northeast, and I'm from Saratoga Springs, New York, when we're, of course, considering our own, the market gets divided up and gets subdivided up and further subdivided up, and so the market area of each casino, in effect, shrinks. And in doing so, in effect, the biggest win for Massachusetts ceases to be the attraction of residents from outside Massachusetts, and in fact, relies on retaining Massachusetts residents' spending that is currently leaving. So in effect, the economic impact on the state of Massachusetts, while substantial, is a matter of recapture of dollars. It's a matter of reallocating how consumer spending patterns occur within the region. One of those consumer spending patterns that will be changing, of course, is how the Northampton trade area, again, the orange area, how their residents spend money. The next slide, please. So, if from a technical point of view, and I'll just mention that these circles are not drawn to scale, they're just to give you the order of logic behind it. We done an empirical and rational way to go about estimating these impacts. So here's what we did. We know that the casino trade area has a total of $8.5 billion in recreational spending. If we assume that $342 million of that in a given year is spent at the casino, which we feel is a very, very conservative assumption, that represents 4% of the total recreational spending in the trade area, in the casino trade area. Now, as a very, very conservative, low-case measure, what we said is if that 4% spend that's being pulled out of the trade area is spread evenly across the entire trade area, and it's conservative because, of course, the closer you get to the casino, you would assume that the higher percentage of spending would be occurring close to the casino. That, in fact, if that 4% happens within, then we have $1 billion of recreational spending in the Northampton market area. 4% of that market area is, of course, $40 million. Now, the city represents 10% of the spending within the Northampton trade area. So we simply applied 10% to that spending, that $40 million going to the casino, and we said the low case is $4 million. That's $4 million of spending that is currently in the city and is now moving to the casino.
Can you explain where the $8 billion comes from?
Yes? Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, $8 billion. It is from Esri Business Analyst Online. This is a data provider that we have that's based on the consumer expenditure surveys that occur. This is a federal level data that they collect. ESRI repackages the data, and we collect that from our proprietary source.
But what does that apply to?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
What area are you describing when you describe 8 billion?
It's the casino trade area. It's the 60-minute drive time from the city of Springfield.
The revenue projections that I've seen are much lower for Massachusetts compared to that number.
This is not casino spending, okay? This is spending on all types of recreational categories. Because remember, we're trying to gauge the substitution effect. Right now, you don't have a casino in Northampton, or in Springfield rather, but there's all kinds of recreational spending that's occurring. That's on anything from concerts to outdoor recreation to meals to basically entertainment of all types. So it's not casino spending. We're not saying that $8.5 billion is going to happen at the casino. We're saying of all types of recreational spending, $8.5 billion.
And that was the blue area that you highlighted in your previous slide?
That was, yes, the 60-minute blue area.
And the 60-minute blue area represented, in your calculation, 77% of the casino's revenue. So there's 23% coming from somewhere else. How does that relate to this chart?
Thank you. Yeah, so first of all, the 77% is not our number. That's from Strategic Market Advisors. That's the report that we found that had previously been prepared.
Yeah,
We did not prepare those numbers. We're just using those numbers.
right.
In this particular
You're using
case,
them- You're using them to make your case, so they're
exactly.
effectively your numbers.
Thank
right?
you. I'm using them as the number we're
Yeah.
looking at. That matter, what we're looking at are the primary trade areas, okay? As I mentioned, the city of Northampton's trade area at 25 minutes is not the area where they get all of their all of their visitors. That's their primary. They get the majority, if you wish.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're comparing the majority of Northampton's visitors to the majority area of the casino's visitors. So logically, we're only focusing on that spending. Now, Northampton will pull from farther away, but it gets more and more diffuse when you get beyond the
No, but I
primary.
mean, the casino is bringing in another 23% of its business from somewhere else outside the blue primary market area.
Yes.
Are you positing that 23% will have no impact on Northampton? In other words, the new money in is 23%.
Mm-hmm.
Does that have a ripple effect, an offset to these numbers?
That's a very good question. It is not contemplated in our numbers. That is not something that we calculated.
Okay.
So to be absolutely direct and fair, that's correct. Now, if you do a back of the envelope look at that and you say, well, we have 23% of the patrons, you look at the total spend at the casino, how much of that's spent, and of course, economic impacts, when you think about them, they tend to be concentrated near the source, right, of course. So as you get further and further away, you get, the halo. So there's likely to be some impact. Now, I've done some very, very back-of-the-envelope calculations. The impact of that additional spend that could be occurring from outside of Western Massachusetts folks coming in, getting up to Northampton, is going to be some small fraction of the numbers we're reporting. It's, to be fair, it's not zero, but it's a small fraction of our numbers.
Okay.
Thank you for the questions. May I continue?
Sure.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So if we look at the low case, we have a 4% decrease. That's $4 million. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're saying that's the conservative case simply because we're assuming that that 4% takeout of the trade area is happening in a very uniform way across the trade area. Of course, the Northampton trade area includes the city of Springfield. So the customers that are most proximate to the casino are in the Northampton trade area, so we would only assume that the takeout for those people is going to be higher than the average for the whole trade area. So our high case is the $8 million figure, again, access, proximity, accessibility, and so on. I do want, if you can go to the next slide, please. In the interest of time, I'm trying to get through this
Yeah.
quickly here.
There's one other factor, just as I'm thinking about this.
Yes.
Of the 77%, again, taking, for the sake of discussion, using that number, some substantial portion of that will be people that are presently leaving that area to go to Connecticut, right? That's one of the whole targets here. So there is the impact of the 23% as an offset, whatever that is, modest or not. But of that 77, it's got to be something like a third or something of that anyway, is folks who are now leaving Massachusetts and going to Connecticut. So there's also got to be some offset for another third who now stay in Massachusetts. People who don't drive from Northampton to go gambling in Foxwoods. Right?
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry, was there a question? Would you?
Yeah, so I'm just asking about offsets to these numbers, and I'm now thinking there's at least two categories of offset that aren't calculated in this.
That's right. Bear in mind, of course, that as you have a casino in proximity, let's say, for instance, you have a hypothetical couple that lives in and around Northampton that travels to Foxwood. Of course, to do so, they got to climb in their car and drive a couple hours and so on. They may go twice a year. That same couple, of course, only logically speaking, would most likely go to the casino more often than that if it's in Springfield. Convenience factor, right? Instead of going a couple times, they might go 4 times a year or 6 times a year. And again, the idea of these impacts are you're sponging up those recreational dollars. So again, while there is a recapture, most of what's happening is a reallocation of existing recreational spending. Your point is taken, though.
Okay.
All right, so our major findings here. We applied the standard modeling that economists do when they look at these types of studies, and what we found is between 90 and 180 jobs would be lost in the city, and that corresponds to earnings of 1.6 to 3.2 million. Now, the city itself, of course, relies on its economy as a tax base. Our report goes into detail about exactly how we calculated this, but just as an indication, I apologize, I'm talking quite quickly here, but as an indication, of course, the city could lose up to $53,000 a year in meals tax, $42,000 in occupancy tax, $48,000 in other fee revenue, $130,000 in direct property tax revenue. If you take all those numbers, you go out 20 years and you inflate it 3%, an average inflation rate, you're looking at between $3.6 million and $7.3 million of lost revenue to the city. So these are obviously substantial numbers. Now, what's not included in these, and I'm remiss for not having it put in this slide, is that none of these numbers reflect lost future development. So I'll just speak one moment about this. Currently, the city of Northampton has 2 major tourist-related projects. Both happen to be flagged hotels, big-name hotels that are coming in. These have quite substantial property tax revenues attached to them and, of course, occupancy tax revenues. Those 2 projects alone, when built and fully occupied, represent about $640,000 a year in tax capacity between property tax, occupancy tax, and meal tax, a very significant amount. Now, if you're a hotel developer and you're now faced with an environment where you have a operating casino in the city of Springfield, where are you more likely to put your next hotel? In the city of Northampton or in the city of Springfield? Well, likely, of course, you're going to rely on existing market demand around the casino and be more likely to place your hotel there. Again, none of those numbers are up here in the numbers that we report. I just want to call your attention. There's additional economic and fiscal impacts associated with that. The final slide is just a conclusion. Again, the idea of finite discretionary, that should say discretionary disposable income, being reallocated, changing consumer patterns as being a sort of the underlying assumption behind the legislation, having unintended consequences for the city of Northampton. These types of businesses, retail, tourism business, tend to operate on very thin margins. And what, in fact, would happen is not only the job losses we're talking about, potentially an endangerment of the status of Northampton as a tourism destination. So a clear and present danger to the city. Thank you very much. I appreciate the allowance of time.
Okay. Mr. Mathis? No, Mr.
Stratton.
Stratton.
Thank you, Commissioners. let me just start off by saying we're happy that the city highlighted its uniqueness. The city of Northampton is indeed unique, and it's one of the many assets that makes Western Mass an attractive region for tourism. As you'll hear from those of us presenting, it's this uniqueness that allows a revitalized Springfield and Northampton to thrive together. And that's why MGM is excited about the potential in Western Massachusetts. Let me just briefly outline our comments today. We're going to try to keep it very brief, respecting the time limits imposed by the commission. That brevity should not suggest that we don't have more robust responses, and we're happy to address any questions that the commission might have. I will briefly address the policy flaws in Northampton's position. Mr. Mathis will address what we'll call the factual flaws in the analysis. For example, why, when considering MGM's business model, it's not a zero-sum game for consumer dollars in Western Massachusetts. And finally, our Massachusetts development partner, Chuck Irving, can address why Northampton establishments and MGM Springfield can thrive together to the benefit of Northampton. So starting just briefly on proximity, we didn't put together a demonstrative with poker chips stacked 18 miles. We think that the 18 miles is self-evident. Northampton is the...
We can agree it would be a lot of poker chips.
That's right, it would be, Commissioner. It's 18 miles away. It's I think 20-minute drive is, some may accomplish. I think it could be closer to 25 or 30, depending on how you drive. It's the seat of another county. We're not going to focus a lot on proximity. We do believe, though, that there is a statutory threshold of proximity under the definition of surrounding community, and that Northampton simply doesn't meet it. Moving on to assuming that Northampton were to surmount that threshold, it really is impacts. And as you've heard from Northampton, the only impact they're raising is operational impacts to entertainment, retail, and entertainment. And what Northampton essentially seeks to do is penalize MGM for embracing the policy objectives of Chapter 23K. MGM is seeking to revitalize one of the Commonwealth's gateway cities, and what Northampton wants to do is to have the commission adopt a form of economic protectionism that penalizes MGM for hoping to revitalize Springfield. Because while Northampton focuses a great deal on the MGM Springfield project, it can't be lost that a good portion of their argument is that Springfield is going to become revitalized. There's going to be more going on in Springfield, and that competes with Northampton. Well, we respectfully submit that it's not the job of this commission nor the objective of the statute to preclude competition between municipalities in the Commonwealth, particularly when they're in different counties. Finally, before I turn it over to Mr. Mathis, and actually one more point. I think Marty passed me a note, and I think it's a point worth making. This issue of regional and statewide substitution was studied and debated during the legislative process. As MGM cited in its papers, the independent studies authored by Spectrum and Innovation provided reassurance to legislators that this scenario of competition would be mitigated by economic development opportunities, the multiplier effect, and the safeguards in the legislation. So I think this scenario was contemplated and addressed in the statute. Finally, Northampton seeks to attribute growth in Springfield in the retail, restaurant, and entertainment industries, and any new investment in Springfield directly to MGM as a negative impact that needs to be mitigated. And we respectfully submit that that would really turn the statute on its head. Northampton's position is not only flawed from a policy level, but it's flawed factually in that it fails to account for MGM's business model and its likely regional impact. And to address that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mr. Mathis.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I also am going to try to be brief, and because of that, I may not be as tactful as I otherwise would be, so please, no offense to the Northampton team, which I deeply respect, and we spent time together. I'll start with what we think are fundamental flaws in the Camoin report. And Mr. Chairman, you pointed out a few of them. The biggest flaw is that it's not based on our own program. It's based on the Penn National proposal that was submitted in Springfield. And with all due respect to that team, our proposal is very, very different. A few key factors is our plan to bring more of our revenue from outside of Western Mass. We've got 50% of our revenue, and this is demonstrated in our submission in the RFA, in terms of our business plan, from outside of Western Massachusetts, a third of that being from Connecticut. We anticipate more than 50% of our non-gaming revenue will be from outside of Western Massachusetts. And I think that speaks to our plan through our database, which is not accounted for in the report, our robust MLife 60 million customer database. We plan to bring customers from outside the market into the market. These are new customers or repatriated customers, and we plan to have them stay longer. And as they stay longer, our anticipation is that they will explore Western Mass. So I think the analysis that says that a customer in Connecticut is an hour and a half away from Northampton, who will be drawn to our property, is flawed. We will get them to Springfield, and at that point, it becomes a 25-minute trip, 20-minute trip, and not a 90-minute trip. So I think the fact that that's not accounted for is an important flaw. The other thing that's not accounted for is the significant unemployment that exists in this market. We plan on, my colleague Kelly Tuckey presented to you last week, we plan on creating 3,000 direct jobs, 2,200 indirect jobs. That's over $100 million of new payroll in a deeply depressed economy that will be in that market. So with all due respect to the Camoin report, there's no reflection of the additional payroll that now will be available to be spent in Northampton. Beyond that, I really want to touch on 3 points, in addition to what Seth said, which is that Northampton is extremely unique, and I find it ironic that they showed a video that demonstrated how unique they are. We're not going to recreate five colleges in Springfield. We're not going to recreate trails or the historic district in Springfield. In all our meetings, and it really is the basis of their report, there is a fixed zero-sum assumption in their proposal, that there are fixed dollars in Western Mass, and they're unapologetic, incredibly unapologetic, about their assertion that Northampton has a monopoly on those dollars. We don't believe that's the case. We provided you empirical evidence from the census that showed in 2000, the total accommodation and food services sales, this is on page 15 of our opposition, and per the 2000 census, Springfield's total food services sales were $148 million. In 2010, the next census, that number grew to $222 million. Springfield's tourism, food and beverage tourism grew over that period of time. It's not surprising that in that same window in Northampton, that number grew from $57.8 million to $81.8 million. In other words, both communities, tourism, economic, entertainment, food, leisure, tourism can grow together. And we think we're going to be a catalyst to make that happen further. So empirical evidence that undercuts the zero-sum gain concept. Again, our marketing plan, I think, which we've provided on our RFA, relies on bringing at least 50% of our revenues from outside of the market. That's not accounted for as an offset. And lastly, I'd ask you to look at our partnerships, which we seek to capitalize in the region to, once we get these folks here, what is the demonstration, what's the evidence that we plan on keeping them there and having them spend dollars in the region? I would point you to our Greater Springfield Convention and Visitor Bureau agreement. When we submitted our RFA, it was a proposal. I'm happy to report that is now an agreement. It's a cross-marketing agreement that provides for putting our visitor guide and cross-marketing to our customers so that when they come to our property, they go explore the region. Similar, we've gotten endorsements from the Berkshire and Franklin Chambers, who also act as tourism and economic generators. Endorsements from them because we've talked to them about partnering on different packages, fall foliage packages, different cross-marketing packages. So I think our submission is abundant in terms of our intent to bring new money into the market, to keep money that's left the market, and I think Northampton will get their fair share of it. Thank you.
Commissioners, I'd like to pass the microphone to Chuck Irving, who has a unique perspective on this as a Massachusetts-based developer. I think can share some input on how Springfield and Northampton can thrive together. Chuck.
Hi, my name is Chuck Irving. I'm with Davenport Properties. Davenport has built over 1 million square feet of shops and restaurant space in Western Massachusetts, and we continue to own most of that today. I also went to school in Western Massachusetts as well as Maine, so I'm intimately familiar with the region, and I've been a fan of Northampton since the 1970s. Springfield is not unique in many ways within New England. It's a small city with a lot of historic buildings, brick, and it's gone into decline. And when Jim Murren came to Springfield, he said, look, I want to do something unique, and this is where I think I can do it. And what Jim looked to were other cities in New England that have experienced a renaissance. And he was specifically looking at Burlington, Vermont, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Providence, Rhode Island, and Portland, Maine. And he charged us to go study these places. And he said, this is the type of renaissance I want to create. And so when we're talking about a substitution effect, I really look to the success of these cities and the impact on the regions around them and say, was it positive or negative? Because as I said, we're not trying to do anything unique. If we can make Springfield like Portland, Maine, or Burlington, Vermont, then I'm going to be very happy 10 years from now. I'm intimately familiar with Portland because I went to Bowdoin College. And back in the 1980s, when I went to Bowdoin, Portland looked like Springfield today. And when my father would pick me up from college, we'd drive home, take a quick stop to Freeport for a cup of chowder, and drive quickly past Springfield and head on back. With the leadership of folks from LL Bean, Portland experienced the type of renaissance that we're trying to catalyze in Springfield. They brought a factory store downtown. They supported a market that would help housing. And they actually took on some historic buildings and turned them around. And what has happened now is Portland is a city that you can read about in magazines in New York City or London. It is one of the cities in this country that is best known for restaurants. A lot more restaurants than we ever intend to build in Springfield. And there was an elasticity in the market that they experienced there, where now we go back and we don't see Freeport devastated by the success of Portland. We don't see the beautiful town of Kennebunkport, which I really feel is like Northampton. I mean, if you want to experience Maine, you know, outside of a city, you stop off at Kennebunkport. If you want to experience the Berkshires, you stop off at Northampton. And Kennebunkport remains a very strong tourist community, and I would argue that the entire interstate highway corridor has benefited by Portland expanding tourism and making it a place that my wife and I, you know, regularly go for a weekend and just hang out. And when we go there, quite honestly, on the way home, we stop off at Kennebunkport. I don't have the facts and statistics. I've just been in New England for many years, and I know our aspiration is to make Springfield a big and great city with tons of restaurants and tons of retail that goes well beyond MGM. I think that's the purpose of this, is to help catalyze a renaissance there. And I guess I can point to two things that talk about Northampton. Number one, you know, retailers like Yankee Candle, an Apple reseller that we're talking to, you know, they feel that there's plenty of market share in the area if MGM comes. You know, Yankee Candle is not in downtown Springfield right now, but they are in Deerfield, Holyoke, Lenox, and Sturbridge. And they said, if you come, we'll go to Springfield. And I said, why? They said, because you're going to make the market bigger. That's the bottom line. On a more personal perspective, I'm the kind of guy that loves hanging out in towns like Northampton, and when Kelly Tucky's daughter, who's in college now, came out this fall to experience the area, she said, where should I go? And I said, you got to go to Northampton. I said, you've got to get outside the city and experience what this area really has to offer. And when MGM opens, that's what we're going to continue to say, because selling that makes our project so much stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. We are sensitive to the time, and Kelly Tucky is here as well, and there is an issue that's been raised before about the labor pool in the hospitality, retail, and restaurant industry, and whether or not, Northampton would be negatively impacted by MGM's presence. Kelly can address those questions should the Commission have any, but otherwise, in the interest of time, we'll complete our presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions or no questions?
Chairman, sorry.
Sorry.
I think we've sort of wrapped in both the discussion about the request for surrounding community status and also, I think, a request for involuntary disbursements. And I guess if you give me the opportunity maybe for just 2 or 3 minutes just to touch on that subject matter, that would be certainly helpful to us. Thank you, Chairman. So we also have in front of the Commission a request for involuntary disbursement. Certainly, the Commission's aware of the factors that it will look at: reasonable likelihood that the community will be designated, that the request is reasonable in scope, and that the risk to the community, that it won't be able to properly determine the impacts outweighs the financial risk to MGM in doing that. Obviously, we've heard a great deal about whether or not Northampton qualifies as a surrounding community, so I'm not going to rehash that particular prong. It's our position that they're not, and therefore they're not going to be able to satisfy the requirements for involuntary disbursement. Should, however, the Commission reach the second, third requirements for approval for involuntary disbursements, the city's request of $42,000 is neither reasonable in scope and the financial burden to the applicant outweighs the risk that Northampton won't be able to assess its impacts. Essentially, reasonableness here is fairly difficult, I think, for the Commission to judge, and that's largely based on what you have in front of you. It's difficult for the Commission to judge the reasonableness based on the documentation that has been submitted. We essentially have 2 fixed fee proposals, very little detail on how the work is to be allocated within each fixed fee. For example, we can't ascertain how many hours a city law firm will spend on internal meetings and internal research, or time actually providing advice and counsel as to the framework of what a mitigation agreement might look like. In connection with the consultant's report, we can't determine what time is spent in kickoff meetings and site tours versus doing some of the economic analysis. Typically, when a party seeks reimbursement through a regulatory process, there are minimum amounts of detail that are necessary for the regulator to assess those particular requests. The city's produced these scope of services, no contracts, no invoices. They haven't put forth any backup as to the process it went through in procuring them. And where the city seeks reimbursement sanctioned by the state, and that's important here, the city bears the burden of demonstrating that selection was reasonable and that those costs are being prudently incurred. The legislature didn't intend the community grant process to be an open checkbook. It saw fit to set aside $50,000 for communities to conduct due diligence on impacts with an obligation to fund more if necessary. Northampton's request for almost the entirety of that amount demonstrates that the request is out of step with what the grant process was intended and is completely out of step with amounts that MGM has agreed to reimburse in connection with other communities much closer in vicinity. The grant program at best should help defray some costs, not indemnify cities for their entire endeavors. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else? Questions?
Nope, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We will take this under deliberation and be back to you in a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I'd like to invite the representatives from the town of Hamden to come to the table, please.
Mr. Chairman, before the gentleman from Hamden take their seat, I have disclosed to my appointing authorities a history of any interaction that I've had both with the members of the Board of Selectmen and from Hamden and Long Meadow, and feel at this time I'll recuse myself from the deliberations on those, for those two communities.
Both Hamden and Long Meadow?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. We'll miss you.
I'll miss you.
Gentlemen, you go first. Want to speak to the mic and introduce yourselves?
My name is John D. Flynn. I'm Chairman of the Board of Selectmen for the town of Hamden.
Vinnie Villomeno, selected for the town of Hamden.
Fairly unfamiliar with the procedure done for this event, so please excuse any missteps that we might make. First off, we'd like to thank the Commission for allowing us our chance to come forth and present our case, albeit a fairly short one, or for consideration. We're fairly late to the process as we really had no interaction with the collection of information or the assessment of the impact on the town of Hamden. We've been a member of the regional task force for casinos for the past 7 years, which was formulated in Munson, you're probably aware of. And we had at that time assessed the impact of a proposed casino in Palmer, which was the impetus probably, starting in the late 2000s. When the emphasis shifted to Springfield, we looked at what we felt was the data that we had accumulated in our own office and saw how relevant it was to that venue. We were perhaps waiting for contact or bilateral communication at that point, which was never established. When we saw the deadline approaching, we contacted and got our application in to be considered. However, again, there has never been any opportunity or extended to us to provide a justification for our application. We do know that the numbers provided for the MGM study do show a considerable projection for customers from Connecticut. I believe the number was 30%. If you look at the maps, which they have provided as well, you'll see that one of the primary travel routes is through Hamden. If you're familiar with Western Mass, you know that Sumner Avenue is a primary corridor to the south end of Springfield, and the corridor that feeds Sumner Avenue is Allen Street, which is a major road in Hamden, a major contributor to the traffic, both from Connecticut and from the east as well, the Munson traffic that comes through Hamden. We are looking for the opportunity to explore this and present the fact that we feel there is some mitigation needed for the impact on the community of Hamden. And we appreciate the opportunity to bring that forth to you. Benny?
I think John sums it up. We have a direct route right to the Connecticut line, and they stipulated that 1/3 of their business is going to come from Connecticut, and we do get a lot of traffic coming straight out of Connecticut. And not only that, we have Munson, as John said, and we like to be considered that that may be an issue for us in the traffic. So, and environmentally, it may do some damage to our roads and whatever. So we like to be considered. Thank you.
One more point. We did listen to the rebuttal for the last applicant, and we at this time have not stated an amount. We are looking for the opportunity to enter this discussion, which we felt was not offered to us. We looked at the written rebuttal, which we felt was a beautiful recap of our Wikipedia entry. Hamden is a lovely community, very pastoral, does have cows. It doesn't really reflect what we feel would be the impact of this traffic. I've lived in Hamden for, I'll say it, the 56 years I've been alive. And I will tell you, the community has grown. it is a community that does exhibit a lot of through traffic in its current configuration. We would anticipate, knowing the history of the town, that this will increase, and there is no way you could not anticipate and prove that there will not be an increase.
Okay, thank you. MGM?
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioners. We hope to be brief here as well. There are two issues raised by the town in its petition in here today, and those are proximity and operational impact to traffic infrastructure. Starting first with proximity, it's MGM's position that Hamden simply is not proximate as contemplated under the Gaming Act. The center of the town of Hamden is 11 miles and a 20-minute drive to the project site. With all due respect to the town, our position, and you'll hear from Kevin Dandrade, is that there really is no primary route to downtown Springfield through Hamden. That's simply unsubstantiated. In fact, Hamden, and it is a beautiful community, it holds the distinction, I believe, as one of the few remaining municipalities in the Commonwealth to have no traffic lights in the entire town. The idea that it'll be a major cut-through is simply unsubstantiated, and Mr. Dandrade will address that further. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Mr. Dandrade, but in summary, if you look at the statutory threshold of proximity and look at the only alleged operational impact, we feel that the town of Hamden, who has the burden here, has not met that burden of demonstrating a significant and adverse impact from the project. And Kevin, if you
Council,
could.
that's the second time you've mentioned the statutory requirement for proximity. The statute uses the term proximate to, or in proximity to. That's a relative term. How do you, and our regulations define it in functional terms, not in geographical terms. So help me, if you would, briefly with your statutory construction that somehow excludes a town like Hamden.
Sure, Commissioner. So the definition of surrounding community contemplates some level of proximity, and that's essentially all that we're saying. We understand that the regulations, and as the Commission has interpreted them, have proximity as advisory to another factor, but it's clearly contemplated under the statute that there has to be some level of geographic proximity to the project, and that's all that we're saying, is that you have to get beyond that threshold. If you're in this instance, you're not adjacent, you're 11-mile drive, and you're 20 minutes away, that is not what was contemplated under the statute to be a proximate community. Does that, if there were tremendous impact, if there were tremendous operational impacts with that very same proximity, I agree that it wouldn't automatically exclude Hamden from consideration. But when you look at the operational impacts, which we believe are negligible, there is no reason to overcome that proximity threshold.
I hear you. All right.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Kevin Dandrade, Principal with TEC Inc. We are the traffic engineers for the project. I am personally a professional traffic operations engineer, and I'm joined by Rebecca Brown on our staff, who is also a professional traffic operations engineer. If I could provide some of that orientation that may help put that proximity and the potential for traffic into perspective. What you see in the dashed outline is the town of Hamden in its relationship to downtown Springfield. This is a map that anyone can get by using Google Maps that looks at the routes coming from Connecticut or from the east attempting to pass through the town of Hamden. When we do our analysis, when we look at the number of trips, and the number of trips that are going to be generated by MGM have already been endorsed by MassDOT as of October as part of our ongoing coordination with the agencies. We also went through an extensive peer review process. But when you look at the potential for trips to come through, we look at a number of different things. And we've gone through a very fine-grained analysis of all the different components of what the project will entail. So we look at the casino patrons, the casino employees, the retail component, the housing component, and the office, among the other entertainment options. We've separated them all out and done what we call gravity model, which looks principally at the populations in the area and any competing factors. You know, are there competition for that type of use, land use, to the south or to the east or elsewhere? In looking at this exhibit, the green arrows represent the predominant travel trends that we expect from the Connecticut towns into the site. The larger arrow representing the travel up and down 91, the smaller arrows representing travel along 190 to 91, or along 83, which is almost a direct route into downtown Springfield. We have assigned traffic as part of our extensive models. These two binders here represent only 2 of the 4 volumes of the traffic study that has been included within the draft environmental impact report and the RFA2 response. Also, what you can see from this exhibit is that there are no state-numbered routes that pass through Hamden. And when looking at the colors of the map, you can see the densely developed areas that have the gray hue here, and then you see a significant amount of green area here. That is representative of very low residential density. The selectmen have noted that there's the potential for trips to come from Monson. Monson has a low population. The population of Hamden is only 5,200 or so people. The routes from Summers and Stafford, some of those routes that come through those mountains in that area are gravel roads. So there's no predominant travel route to be expected to come through Hamden. And even though there may be no routes, there's also very limited population when you talk about the total population that we're going to draw from that even has the potential to come through. This shows the distribution of traffic that was refined through the GPI peer review, Greenman Peterson, Inc., for the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. These were edits to our technical numbers for the distribution of that traffic. Hamden was never identified as a key route, as a key location for study, because it is not expected to be impacted. Even the volumes going through Wilbraham, knowing that part of Monson is up in here, any of the potential patrons, employees, et cetera, from Monson not only have a route through Hamden, but they have a more direct route through Wilbraham. The petition does not show any data. It does not show or quantify any difference of opinion that could build upon any of the work that we've done or that has been peer-reviewed by other professionals. The allegation or assumption of traffic impacts is flawed because there's just no population to draw from. When we look at the closest corner of Hamden, it's more than 5 miles away. There are no state routes proceeding through. And when we try our hardest to try to find out the greatest level of impact that we can project based on those population zones, it's a dozen trips in that peak hour on a Friday, 6 in, 6 out. I'm confident that as the commission works with your own peer review consultants, that you will determine that this is not a significant and adverse impact to the town of Hamden. Thank you.
Mr. Stratton, finished?
Yes, we're finished. Thank you, Commissioner.
Anybody?
No?
We haven't, as you know, looked at this beyond looking at your materials and hearing you, and we will be looking at it, and our consultants will be looking at it, but on the face of it, it looks kind of reasonable what you're saying. Have you offered Hamden the look-back feature? In other words, if it turned out for some reason this assessment was wrong and there was a material impact, that you would then have an opportunity to talk to them about it?
Mr. Chairman, Michael Mathis for the record. It's a very fair question, and it's something we strongly considered when Hampton sent in their request. the challenge that we have is that we've built a coalition, as you know, based on abutting communities. And the question and the difficulty we've had is, where do you draw the line? And in fairness to the representations we've made throughout Western Mass and in those communities, we feel like it would be inequitable for us to offer Hamden the look back when we've told other communities that we drew the line at abutting communities as well as Holyoke because of the workforce development relationship. In fact, I think there's been a couple of communities who raised their hands, so to speak, after they saw Northampton and Hamden file petitions because they didn't realize that they were in the running for a potential designation. So for those reasons, we feel like we have to maintain our early representations that the group that we talked to was the group that we talked to.
Just one thing, don't know whether you know this or not, and again, not prejudging where we come down on this because we haven't looked at it, we haven't heard from our consultants. There is something called a Community Mitigation Fund, which was put together by the legislature, and when it's fully up and running, when the casinos get moving, there'll be something like $15 to $20 million a year that will be available for communities to mitigate impacts which were not anticipated or anticipatable in advance. So there are other bites at the apple here, as well as the bite you're taking now, which is to petition to be a surrounding community. Anything else?
Can we rebut?
Sure.
Okay. I think one of the points we wanted to make is that we felt it was a fairly unilateral process, the review part. The town, which is very accessible, was never contacted. We certainly have data that we would have been happy to share with their traffic consultant. I would question the proximate part because there have been agreements signed with communities that probably are a further distance than the number they have for Hamden, whether it's Ludlow, et cetera. So I think our basis is the fact that, again, we did not throw a number out there. We are not saying, well, you gave community A this, you gave community B this, we should get the same. We're saying we feel there is an impact. We would appreciate the opportunity to discuss that. And if there is not going to be a bilateral discussion, unfortunately, we have to go to you, who will be basically our protectors in this. And we ask for your guidance and your help in that.
Okay.
And we
And
thank you for your
you've
time.
submitted your traffic studies to us. Do we have
We'll be
those?
happy to.
Yeah. To Ombudsman Ziemba.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'd like to ask the town of Long Meadow to come to the table, please.
Thanks.
Thanks. Who is leading off for Long Meadow?
Yes.
you
Good
ready?
morning, Commissioners. My name is Brandon Moss. I'm an attorney with Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, and Lehane. Seating to my left is Stephen Crane, who's the town manager for the town of Long Meadow, as well as Marie Angelides, who's the chair of the Long Meadow Select Board. And also seated to her left is Catherine Hesse, who's an attorney at our law firm. In terms of today, I put together just a PowerPoint to provide an overview, but I mean, it's certainly unfortunate that we're in this position that the town of Long Meadow prepared a 244-page detailed data-driven analysis which relied upon, in part, but not entirely, the Greenman-Pedersen, Inc. peer review. GPI, Greenman-Pedersen, Inc. was not the town's consultant. It was an independent consultant that was hired by the RPA, the Regional Planning Authority, for the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. And this is the same GPI report a moment ago when a prior petition was discussed. The page from the GPI report was used to show why a community was not included. But that's the same report that we in part rely on to show why Long Meadow should be impacted and should be considered as being an impacted community. Just by way of geography, and I don't think there's any dispute here in terms of proximity, but Long Meadow is located due south of the site. The site itself, is in the south end of Springfield, and Long Meadow is the closest community to the south end of Springfield. The report itself, what we've heard today, even by MGM saying this morning, is that a third of the revenues are coming from Connecticut. That MGM is focusing on Connecticut for a sizable percentage of its revenues. Those residents from Connecticut have to, unless they're taking a canoe or kayak along the Connecticut River, they have to go through Long Meadow. And we're not saying entirely, not at all, about I-91. Long Meadow's roads, Long Meadow's local roads are used to access Springfield. They're used as a bypass, whether it's the accidents that happen every couple weeks, whether it's congestion. The roads to the site are recognized as going through Long Meadow. And the next slide shows, this is something I think that shouldn't be too unfamiliar to this commission, and certainly not to MGM. This is what was presented by MGM last week at its presentation. That circle shows, other than the southwestern and southeastern portions of Connecticut, that a bulk of the expected patrons to MGM Springfield are coming up through Connecticut. The epicenter is Hartford, and it's West Hartford within Connecticut. And conveniently, West Hartford, Hartford are along I-91. In terms of the next slide, shows two things. And it shows, the next slide shows, with my laser pointer, a star where MGM Springfield is going to be located. That slide, you will see that there are roads, Route 5, which is a state-designated road, but is a Long Meadow owned and controlled roadway. Long Meadow is responsible for, passes parallel to 91 up to the site. And what we're looking at here is every single abutter is in gray. It's a horseshoe of gray abutters that were designated by MGM. All of them have been designated except for one missing link, Long Meadow. Yet 30% of MGM's expected revenues will be coming from Connecticut and will be passing through Long Meadow. It's no secret here, in terms of that. When the commission was here last week, the CEO said that he said, I quote unquote, I just want their money to come here, and he was referring to Connecticut. When the president of MGM Resorts was here last week, he said, we are right in the target range of Mohegan and Foxwoods. We are ideally in a position to go right into Hartford and attack. Well, to attack means that those patrons are traveling through Long Meadow to the site. I also want to point out, and I think it's important to note, when MGM was here back in November, and it's on page 168 of the transcripts, the now MGM president, Michael Mathis, said, we are closer in a lot of ways to Connecticut than we are to some of our abutters. Well, those parts of Connecticut go through Long Meadow. He also said that the quote unquote, the physical impact on, for example, to the east of Ludlow and Wilbraham is remarkably less, I think, than if you look to the ... to the south. Long Meadow is directly to the south of Springfield. Now, we've tried to work with MGM in terms of discussions, and I know with the guidelines for today, the focus was not to get into a discussion of that. We haven't obviously reached agreement, but that shouldn't have prevented a designation from being made. In terms of this issue of percentages, we recognize that there are existing traffic and transportation infrastructure issues within Longmeadow, and we're not looking for MGM to assume 100% of the cost to address that. We're looking for the payment of a fair share, a reasonable percentage. But that's an issue not for today. That's an issue for down the road. If we're provided, and we certainly feel it's our position to be provided, a seat at the table, to be in the room, to continue negotiating with MGM, that's the time and the place, not here today. Today is to allow us to stay at the table, to continue to negotiate with MGM. In terms of, Longmeadow, the next slide shows a Google map, which, seems to be also a little bit more in detail, laying out some of the areas within Longmeadow that lead to the site. Again, we have Route 5, which in Connecticut, at exit 49, crosses, and it crosses over again at the so-called Longmeadow Curve, which has shown up in some of the papers. The Longmeadow Curve is exits 1, 2, and 3. It's a messy interchange. There's backups. The backups and the congestion spills into Longmeadow local roads. Travelers from the south who seek an alternate route or forced to seek an alternate route, they go on to Route 5. And Longmeadow residents, there's a spillover effect, they go into other roads. But by way of frame of reference, is when you type in Longmeadow on Google Maps, it just drops it in what it views as the center of town. A is along Longmeadow Street, and it goes right to the site. We're talking about a primary route directly into Springfield and into the site. This map, there was earlier today, there was a large green arrow that MGM just had up on its last presentation that showed the predominant travel trends from Connecticut into the site. That's what we're seeing here, and that's in Longmeadow. We have had 3 engineering reports dealing with traffic and transportation infrastructure and the fact that this is going to be a significant and adverse impact. The independent consultant that was hired, retained by the PVPC, GPI, the town also retained Parsons Brinkerhoff, which was not redundant. Parsons Brinkerhoff put a dollar value to the requested mitigation. And aside from that, we also had the town engineer who was familiar with local conditions and had the experience with that. In pages 10 and 11 of its opposition to our petition, MGM tries to attack the GPI report. This is the very same GPI report that just a few minutes ago, MGM conveniently was able to rely upon in terms of saying why another community was not a surrounding community. MGM can't have it both ways, using the GPI report to support its case on one end, and then using and attacking the GPI report to show an opposite position when it's not convenient for MGM. The next slide shows what the GPI study focused on. And it was a 29-page report. There was quite a bit of detail. It confirmed and identified roadway impacts on Longmeadow's local roads. And I'm not talking about 91. It also recommended specific mitigation measures for Longmeadow's local roads. And it did, to the extent there was a concern with 91, it did recommend that there be a simulation model be done through Mass DOT and MGM being involved for the Longmeadow curve that we talked about. We turn to the next slide. The MGM fails to account for the fact that Longmeadow's local roads are alternates, and they are viable alternates. They are the only viable north-south alternative to travel on the interstate in that area, and they're already bottlenecked. Mass DOT, which we've provided in our petition, specifically said in no uncertain terms that Longmeadow Street, Laurel Street corridors are listed as regional congestion bottlenecks. And it specifically recognized the fact that Longmeadow Street and Converse Street, which go through the town, which are the routes to this casino, are arterial roads with regional significance. Next slide. The GPI study recommended 3 specific measures be taken in terms of seeking funds for signalized intersections: Long Meadow Street at Converse Street, Long Meadow Street at Forest Glen Road, and Converse Street at Laurel Street. And I know in its report, MGM, or its opposition, MGM, tries to distort, tries to unreasonably condense the GPI report, and that's not right. The GPI report devoted 7 pages to taking MGM's trip generation analysis and saying that that was actually too low, that it faulted MGM for relying on Detroit. No one can say that Springfield is Detroit. They have different land areas, they have different populations, they have different roads, and most importantly, Detroit has 4 casinos. This will be the first casino in Western Massachusetts, which we understand is likely to happen, but this is 1 casino, and it's not a fair comparison. GPI, Jason DeGray is here in the room today. I don't know if the commission had any questions for him, but he's here in the room, and he looked at and made the determination that those trip generation numbers were too low. So there was an adjustment, and this wasn't pulling 20% out of the sky. What it was looking at Connecticut, the casinos in Connecticut, viewing those as a comparator to what to Long Meadow's, to MGM's trip generation, and actually saying that even those numbers were too low, because unlike someone who might not go to the movies in Connecticut, this is a gaming establishment in the broadest possible sense. Our statute, the Expanded Gaming Act, doesn't view a gaming establishment as electronic gaming and tables. It recognizes it to be the gaming and the non-gaming amenities that are part of the establishment. And this GPI report recognized that the movie theater, for example, might be a draw to someone to Springfield, a new trip. And the percentages are high. There's approximately the highest percentage of traffic is coming from the south. And we are talking about, just in 1 hour alone, 286 cars on 91, 53 cars just during that 1 hour on a Friday evening, 53 cars going on Long Meadow roads. And I'd also point out that what MGM fails to account for is congestion is a way of life, unfortunately, in Western Massachusetts in this area. And with the congestion, which isn't measured as specific episodic events, with that congestion, folks go through, drivers go through, whether they know the roads or their devices tell them to, they go through Long Meadow roads, and there's backups, and there's slow. One of the select board members on the way to work had indicated to us that it's not an easy drive into work in downtown Springfield because of the backups on the roads. The next slide. Aside from GPI, we also had Parsons Brinkerhoff, another traffic engineer, look at the recommendations. There's very little reserve capacity for the Long Meadow Street, Forest Glen Road intersection. And so if there's even a modestly higher demand than forecast, that's going to create a problem. There are a number of recommendations that are on the screen. I won't read through them, but there's several intersections that were recommended. This isn't something as simple as just changing some signalized intersections. To address and to get a flexible, functional, responsive roadway network, work is necessary, and that's laid out in the Parsons Brinkerhoff report, and it's laid out on this slide. This whole idea of Springfield being a catalyst, that's a separate section of the GPI report. That's on pages 23 and 24. That's 2 sections after the use of a 20% upward adjustment on MGM's numbers. But even MGM, even its numbers, recognizes that traffic will be going through Long Meadow. The next slide also identifies a number of intersections that should be monitored as part of this, or a number of roadways: Shaker Road, Dwight Road, Long Meadow Street. And this is GPI's exact words. These are the most likely locations to experience impact as a result of the casino proposal. Again, I think one thing I do want to emphasize with MGM's response is they talk about percentages of what's acceptable. That's an issue for negotiation. That's an issue for arbitration. That is not an issue for designating, because these impacts are clear. Traffic and transportation alone are reasons to view Long Meadow as a surrounding community. The next slide shows two additional intersections that were in the MIPA study. And I know when there was the category 2 licenses before this commission a few months ago, one of the focal points was whether or not there was intersections within a municipality that were being studied. We have 2 of those here. Long Meadow Street at Converse Street, Inglewood Road, Long Meadow Street at Forest Glen Road. And both of those intersections, those areas, were identified as areas that require mitigation because of MGM. The next slide. The next slide puts this all in perspective in terms of where everything is. Right here along the border is Forest Glen, Long Meadow Street. We have Converse Road. Bliss Road was another area that was identified for mitigation. These are all along Route 5 and all leading into the quote-unquote Long Meadow curve. I also want to point the commission's attention to the star at the top of this slide. That star where the red pointer is significant because of the next slide. This was taken only 3 weeks ago. That stream of traffic is going onto Long Meadows roads. This was a holiday week. It was January 2nd, 2014. And traffic, because of an incident on 91, was routed onto Long Meadow streets. Those cars, one could argue, might even be an action shot right now because the cars in this photo are moving as quickly as they did in real life. They sat and they slogged along. Unfortunately, due to the periodic incidents, due to the congestion that occurs, this is what happens. And what's going to happen here with MGM Springfield, we again recognize that it's likely to happen and be built, is the fact that you're adding, MGM is expecting 20,000 cars to visit the site, but even in that 1 hour alone, we're talking using GPI's numbers, 286 cars on 91, 53 cars on Route 5. And that's adding quite a bit. Again, I must emphasize, we are looking for MGM to assume a reasonable percentage of responsibility, not to fix existing problems, but it's clear that MGM is causing additional cars, but for this casino that would not be going to the site. There's a fundamental misunderstanding, I think, of Massachusetts municipal law and Massachusetts municipal contracts practicing. When Long Meadow can't just assume the costs to make these mitigation measures and then seek reimbursement. Not when it's near the tax levy. The legislature, and through Proposition 2.5, there's limits in terms of Long Meadow's ability to just assume the expense and then seek reimbursement. So we're seeking funds. And again, that's for down the road. We're seeking funds so that when the light switch gets turned on at MGM Springfield, these roadways are ready to accept this additional traffic, because otherwise, Long Meadow is going to experience significant and adverse impacts. I know there were the next slide, there were some additional impacts that we studied as part of our 244-page submission. We had an expert who looked at police and fire EMS. Long Meadow, it can't be disputed, responds, the fire and EMS responds to incidents on 91. The police respond to incidents on Long Meadow's local roads. These are impacts that were specifically studied by our consultant within Long Meadow. Reliance on non-regional letters and a study that was done and doesn't even reference Long Meadow isn't compelling, considering specific impacts that were studied by our consultant, Don Jutton of Municipal Resources, Inc. The other impact that I did want to also flag is something that MGM's made an issue of with every single one of its surrounding community agreements, which is utilities, water and sewer. That's a part of those agreements. That's something that we would look to address through a look back if we are allowed to have a seat at the table with MGM. But I think it's important to say that August 28th letter that was cited in MGM's opposition is anything but a direct, definitive statement that the water and sewer flows can accept this. It's based on a number of assumptions and plans that weren't created yet. So, bottom line here is that Long Meadow will be significantly and adversely impacted, and traffic and transportation infrastructure under the regulations are enough to make that designation, but we do have a number of other impacts. What Long Meadow is seeking here is reasonable, and it's to protect the residents of Long Meadow from having to have the MGM Springfield tax override and from having to assume these costs that otherwise wouldn't exist but for MGM Springfield. I'm free to answer any questions, and is anyone else with me today?
I don't know if I missed it in my packet, but are you requesting involuntary disbursements at this time?
At this time, we have not filed a petition. We didn't want to put too much before this commission today. Certainly, depending on if we're designated and negotiating, what happens with negotiations, we may address that at some point, but I wanted to keep the commission's focus on our 244-page report.
Fair enough.
Anybody else? MGM?
Thank you, Commissioners. Just at the outset, we've had a long dialogue with the town of Long Meadow, and I won't get into details. It's been clearly the most challenge that we've had on our side in our negotiations with Long Meadow. But I just want to point out the professionalism with which Town Manager Stephen Crane and the Chair of the Select Board, Marie Angelides, has approached this. Despite the challenges that we face, it's been a productive and professional and collegial dialogue. So I just didn't want that to be lost on the Commission. Getting into, I think the first thing that we need to address at the outset is this notion that surrounding community agreements that MGM has entered into with other adjacent communities should somehow be held against MGM, and that MGM should be penalized for entering into voluntary surrounding community agreements with communities that may have weaker arguments that they're impacted under the regulatory regime of proximity and operational impacts. For instance, Ludlow. Ludlow may have a weaker argument than Long Meadow. We designated Ludlow through the insistence and leadership and cooperation of, for instance, Aaron Saunders on the Select Board in Ludlow. We put that off the table, and that's the approach that MGM's taken all along. And I think it's important to note that in the surrounding community regulation, the factors, proximity and significant and adverse impact operationally to traffic infrastructure, are only in the portion of the regulation that deal with a contested surrounding community designation. That's to say that because you enter into either through consensually in an application or a surrounding community agreement with another community, that is not and should not be deemed an admission that that community would satisfy the criteria before this commission to be deemed a surrounding community. And it's our very strong position that most, if not all, of the communities that we've designated through surrounding community agreements would not be able to meet the statutory and regulatory threshold had they not entered into those agreements. So we've heard this from Long Meadow, and we've heard it from Hamden. It's an easy argument to make with a map that why shouldn't we be one too, but it's a different standard. And I think that's important. In terms of proximity, we concede that what I've characterized earlier and with Commissioner McHugh discussed to be what we view to be the statutory threshold on proximity. With Long Meadow, this is all about traffic, and that's why I'll be brief. I'm going to turn it in a moment over to Kevin Dandrade, our traffic consultant. Long Meadow is traffic is the argument. I'm a town resident. I live in Long Meadow, and again, I appreciate the efforts the town's making, but I'm familiar with the traffic in Long Meadow. Traffic's been an issue in Long Meadow for a long time. It's part of the town has sought to preserve its very unique and attractive New England character. It has one-lane roads, and it does have traffic issues. Those are pre-existing. And what our position is, and you'll hear from Mr. Dandre, that what, despite their arguments to the contrary, what Longmeadow is really looking for MGM to do is to solve the pre-existing issues that Longmeadow has long had. And there's no recognition that of the percentage, our position is negligible percentage increase in the traffic to Longmeadow. There's two phrases from a legal standpoint that I think are dispositive here, and I'd like them to inform the Commission's consideration of this petition, and that's the phrase significant and adverse. You've heard that we can see that traffic will go through Longmeadow. Yes, traffic will go through Longmeadow. There's a small percentage that will. It's not significant, and it's not adverse, and you'll hear from Mr. Dandre why. The other phrase that I think is important is, and this is a phrase raised and highlighted by Longmeadow, is understandable, predictable, and knowable impacts. That's a standard the town embraces, but can't meet. They have studies and reports, but they're missing the causal link between what they claim to be the negative impacts and MGM's operations. It's simply not there. For instance, and they bear the burden on that. For instance, the MRI report, which you just heard about. MRI is not here today, but it's essentially a price list. If you want to do these things in town, here's what they'll cost. Well, there's no analysis or suggestion that there's a understandable, predictable, and knowable link to MGM's operation and these perceived impacts. And that's the problem. The town claims to have a significant and adverse impact. And I don't think they do so in bad faith, but their arguments are nonetheless based on guesswork and speculation. And that doesn't meet the standard when you're at the stage before the commission. Without anything further, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dandre, who can address the traffic impact on it.
Thank you, Attorney Stratton. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, again, Kevin Dandre, principal at TEC, representing MGM. What I'd like to do is go through a fact-based presentation to you of what our detailed analysis concludes. And I hope that you will agree with me in finding that there is no significant and adverse impact within the town of Longmeadow. To orient you, similar to what we did for Hamden, outlined in the white dash is the border of Longmeadow. You can see, as Longmeadow's council has pointed out, that there are two interchanges that serve Route 5, neither of which are within the town's boundaries. One is at exit 49 in Enfield, Connecticut. The next one is at exit 1 in Springfield. So there's no direct highway access between 91 and Route 5 within the town borders. The arrows indicate the predominant travel trends for those coming from the northern Connecticut towns around, essentially, Longmeadow, through East Longmeadow here, where we've assigned some traffic along 190, and then the greatest percentage coming from the south occurs on I-91. Shown in red is the constricted Route 5 corridor, where that is representing essentially the trips that are originating from within Longmeadow, and a very small percentage of those trips that may come from northern part of Enfield. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot from MassDOT's roadway jurisdiction map. The only roadway that is not town-owned is I-91. Massachusetts Department of Transportation has exclusive authority over what happens within that state highway layout from an operations perspective, a maintenance perspective, or any improvements of the highway in that location. The lane drop occurs somewhere in this location near the northerly end, northwest corner of Longmeadow. That is an existing condition, and that is something that the state and the Regional Planning Commission have been studying and are continuing to study over the next year, where they just recently brought on another consultant to look at the regional scale improvements for the I-91 facility. Next slide, please. As part of the existing conditions, we also collected additional travel time data, looking at the northbound movement of traffic from Connecticut towards the MGM site. Again, we show exit 49 on the bottom of the picture here, exit 1, and the MGM site further to the north. We did this just over a week ago on the Friday preceding the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend, which is one of the busiest ski weekends of the year. We did it knowing that there would be additional congestion on I-91 northbound. When you look at the traffic data sources that are available, whether it's through Google Maps or elsewhere, looking at traffic conditions, this was a case where I-91 was backed up from the lane drop all the way through that Route 5 interchange at exit 49. What it shows is that even when it's backed up that far and traffic has the ability to jump off of 91, it takes longer to go via Route 5 than it does to simply stay on 91 northbound and go through the lane drop. It's just over 3.5 minutes longer to deviate away from the I-91 corridor. In reference to the peer review efforts that have been done to date, we have worked extensively with not only MassDOT, but the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, PVPC, and their consultant, GPI. One of the things that was mentioned a moment ago was how we're interpreting that peer review study. We've done extensive research, data collection of our own. We've met with MassDOT on several occasions to review the trip generation characteristics, knowing that they're not only looking at it for this region and this application, but statewide, Commonwealth-wide. When we look at the data that we collected in Detroit, Michigan, yes, there are 4 casinos within that area, but the population area that serves those 4 casinos is much greater than 4 times the population of the Springfield area. MGM Detroit has a 40% share of that business. So the trip generation characteristics, and Rebecca and I have worked with a data consultant out there to look at every single driveway that serves the MGM Detroit facility, as well as the adjacent facilities that could contribute traffic destined for the MGM. That data shows that it's conservative because they have a greater share of that market. And we also compared it against 2 other known data sources that have been not only referenced within our report, but others like Suffolk Downs, in looking at its relationship to the Horseshoe Hammond Casino in Indiana, just over the outside the borders of Chicago, Illinois, and the Sugar House Casino in Philadelphia. The rates that we've employed for the casino operation in Springfield are 20% higher than those other data sources. The reason we've selected those is that they represent an urban community that has great access to public transportation and a network of streets that can serve a casino like that. It is in a mixed-use environment, which is a very important aspect of our facility. If you recall from the presentation I gave to you on November 7th, one of the greatest benefits of the siting of the MGM site is the fact that it's downtown. We have that access to walking, to biking, to public transportation. That is not a Mohegan Sun, and it is not a Foxwoods. And to simply add arbitrarily another 20% on top of the extensive research we've already done, just to view it through, quote, the prism of conservatism is not appropriate. So as we've worked with PVPC and GPI to ask for the foundation for their assumption that it is yet another 20% higher, it's not substantiated. We did receive a follow-up packet on January 6th from GPI that gives some additional background on their distribution comments for how traffic's moving away from the development, but there's no additional data to substantiate that extra 20%, and therefore we completely disagree with that opinion. Again, it's not founded in data.
Could you just back up? I want to make sure I understand this right. So this is saying that for every gaming position, the first box, MGM Grand Friday evening peak hour, you'll add a quarter of a trip for every gaming position. So if you had 100 gaming positions, you'd add 25 trips.
Exactly.
During that period of time.
It's the relationship,
Okay.
the rate of how many trips we expect to generate.
Right.
And this is something that, I put the note at the bottom, but this trip rate was endorsed by MassDOT back in October because it allowed us to finish with the rest of our analysis, and we did it in steps. But we went through a very fine-grained analysis of all the different types of trips, whether it's the casino employees or patrons or the retail restaurants. When you aggregate all those different types of uses, the rate that we came up with for the entire project was slightly higher than what was approved in the DEIR for Suffolk Downs. So it is consistent with another urban model.
So how many gaming positions are there? About 4,000, right?
Just under, yes.
Yes. So it's 1,000 trips an hour that we're talking about on Friday.
Yeah, for the casino only, but we've added the other, and we've itemized the other types of trips. So we've gone through a much more extensive assessment of what this site in particular is going to generate with an extreme level of conservatism. Keep in mind that we have not taken credit that any of these trips are just going to pass by the site, that they're already on I-91 for another reason. We've assumed that they're all entirely new. We haven't taken any credit for the existing uses that reside on the sites today, the 50 parcels that are being consolidated. And we also have not taken any credit for the interception of trips that are currently going down to Connecticut to the casino and now staying in the Pioneer Valley. So those are three major elements of conservatism that have already been built into our numbers that more than account for that extra 20% that has been arbitrarily suggested.
But the 26 is the net, right?
26 is the casino rate only. So on top of that, we've suggested additional trips associated with the retail, the restaurant, the housing, the office, and the entertainment that are layered on top of that. This is really meant to represent the factor that folks in the area may not be as familiar with, which is the casino-specific trip generation. So in the end, when we look at how many trips in total are generated by the site, with the mix of all the uses, it's roughly 1,300 trips per hour. And that's a sum of all the ins, all the outs, in every single direction.
And it is that number that the town suggests, or the PVPC suggests should be increased by 20% for the prism of conservatism?
Exactly.
That's the number that they suggest should be 20% higher.
Yeah. So even with the conservative assumptions that we've already discussed, they've suggested yet another 20%. But we've also shown that it is comparable with the Connecticut DOT assessment of the rates for the casino. It is almost spot on. So as another level of comparison, it's very important to understand that our numbers are solid, and it does not require that extra 20% that has been suggested. When we look at the distribution, and this is what we originally presented within our draft environmental impact report, and this is a report that was not just dropped one particular day. This was an iterative process in working with MassDOT, PVPC, City of Springfield, and many others to look at the quantitative impacts of the project. We had proposed 3% of traffic, given the populations in this area, that might want to go through those gateway intersections in the town of Longmeadow. Next slide, please. The GPI peer review suggested that that might be increased to 3.5%.
So that's via Route 5?
Via Route 5.
Right.
Essentially what they've done is they've substantiated the distribution of our trips within 0.5% over the entire network of streets. The benefit of us being in the urban downtown and having that spider web of streets that goes out in every single direction means that we have the ability to distribute trips and to soften the impacts in any of those particular communities. So that 0.5% change, when you consider our numbers for what we would generate, would be on the scale of 5 or 6 trips. Next slide, please. Given their extra 20%, and given their change from 3 to 3.5%, it's now 53 trips over the course of an entire hour. That's the sum of all the ins and the outs. So what we're talking about is less than 1 car per minute, and when you separate it in the ins and outs, it's roughly a car every 2 minutes. Next slide. Now, what is the impact of that additional trip characteristic? Yes, we are going to generate traffic in Longmeadow, but it is an insignificant level of traffic. Our quantitative analysis shows that there's no change in the level of service, and all that's required is some retiming of signals to essentially balance the green times, who's getting what green time. And the difference in delay is expected to be less than 2 seconds per vehicle. That's going to be unnoticeable to the average motorist. And even when considering the GPI's suggested inflation of those numbers, it's still less than 2 seconds of average delay. Next slide. When we look at the safety aspects, and the town has presented, I think, a very appropriate photo, because when you look at the safety characteristics that deal with the Longmeadow curve, there's some very important pieces to consider. Data. When you look at the stratification of those accidents, the crashes that occur, they are not occurring during congested peak periods. They're occurring outside of those periods. The picture that was shown to you on January 2nd, that was a blizzard event. And there's no question that when I-91 shuts down in between exits 49 and 1, the traffic is going to move in a different direction. They've already conceded that that is what happens today. It will happen tomorrow, and it will happen well into the future, regardless of what Mass DOT may do within the city of Springfield, either to change the exit 1 configuration, anything with the viaduct, because anytime you have a closure of a highway in between 2 interchanges, traffic is going to go somewhere else. That is not expected to change as a result of the MGM development. In fact, PVPC did a study on behalf of the city of Springfield that looked at the crash characteristics on 91 during the Big E. And there was absolutely no correlation between that extra congestion that occurs during the Big E and an increase in the crash trend. In fact, it was a drop. So that's important for the commission to consider when looking at the safety aspects, is that there's no correlation with the crashes occurring during the congested peak periods, and it's actually a drop when looking at a comparison to the Big E. And we're going to be a fraction of that traffic. Next slide, please. In summary, we have done a very data-driven and quantitative analysis of the impacts, and there are no perceivable traffic impacts within the town of Longmeadow. Just because we studied it doesn't mean that there's an impact. And you know, I know the commission knows that, and your peer review consultants can also help you to understand this level of increase in traffic. We're talking about changing the traffic stream on a Friday peak period by 1.7%. That's that one car roughly a minute. There's no change in those 2 gateway locations in the town of Longmeadow, knowing that once you get through those 2 gateway intersections, traffic only further distributes from there, and there's no perceivable change in level service anywhere within the town of Longmeadow based on the populations that we're drawing from. There are other more convenient and attractive routes. The I-91 congestion, Longmeadow's council points to a letter from January 9th. It is a 1-page letter. I implore you to read that in its entirety. All they're suggesting is that the town has suggested and requested funding to look at those same 2 gateway intersections using public funding. It appears that the district is just suggesting that as they evaluate the other regional scale improvements between exits 1 and the viaduct, that they just pause just to make sure that nobody wastes time and money in looking at the Route 5 corridor. That is part of a long-term regional scale improvement and has never been suggested by PVPC or MassDOT that would be put on the shoulders of MGM. In summary, in my professional opinion, the town of Longmeadow will not be significantly or adversely impacted by the MGM development. Thank you.
Okay.
Before we leave, Mr. Dandrade, can you go back a couple of slides, please? Can you help me understand what is that retiming option in the middle that you alluded to?
Certainly. If you kept the timings that exist within the controller that runs the signal, if you kept those exactly the same, on the Friday peak period, at the first intersection, right at the town-city line, Long Meadow Street, which is Route 5, and Forest Glen. This VC ratio represents what's called the volume to capacity ratio. It's essentially saying how saturated the intersection is with traffic. The delay is just under 30 seconds, and it's a level service C. By us adding traffic with no changes at all, it changes it by 1% here, adds a couple seconds, and still maintains the same level of service. With minor timing revisions, we bring it down a little bit, but it's still essentially the same number. It's a negligible impact to the intersection.
And so the third column would be to figuring out the optimal time between red lights and yellow lights, if you will?
Exactly.
In each of those intersections?
And that's something that's normally done as part of a routine maintenance activity anyway for a municipality. And frankly, is something that's good to review once a year, once every other year. Is it always done that way? And I'm not just talking about Long Meadow, but lots of municipalities? No, but could it be optimized? Yes, but we're talking about with only a second of average delay. It's essentially taking a few seconds from one approach and giving it to another.
Thank you.
And you've taken I-91 out of the equation because MassDOT's going to take care of it, right?
Well, we are still in the review process with MassDOT. What I can testify to is that in all of our conversations and within the quantitative analysis that they've asked us to do, they asked us to go down to exit 1 and to study the merges, the diverges, the weaving sections, all the way from there up to and beyond the site to the north. But the idea of the lane constriction at the Long Meadow curve has never come up. It's really just for us to analyze, which we've done, but never with the idea of mitigating for that existing condition.
But if you take it into account, and maybe I missed it when you were talking, if you take it into account the impact of the additional trips per hour on I-91, on the congestion on Route 5?
Yes, and knowing that this situation that I described before for that Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
holiday weekend,
Right.
That is the anomaly. That is the case where traffic is backed up on those few very popular holiday ski weekends where it backs up beyond that interchange. During most cases, when you're traveling north on 91, you can't see the back of the red lights in order to influence you to even think about getting off. But if you did, it's going to take you a few more minutes, so you're only going to do that once, and you're never going to do it again. But that extra volume has been contemplated with all of our analysis that has been submitted.
And as we go through the analysis, we'll see how you took that into account.
That's correct.
You highlighted in an earlier slide a lane drop.
Yes.
That occurs just outside of the Long Meadow. Is that essentially a lane that exists that merges into less lanes at that particular point?
Yes. As you come across the Connecticut line, and just before you get to exit 1, there are 3 travel lanes on I-91 northbound that go down to and merge into 2.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Commissioners, in summary, if you look at the regulations, specifically with respect to operational impact on traffic infrastructure, one of the key points is changes in level of service. I think it's abundantly clear from Mr. Dandrade's presentation that there will be no change in level of service in the town. And as a result, there is no significant and adverse impact to traffic infrastructure. With respect to the other impacts, we do address those in the papers submitted to the Commission. We won't take time to go through each of those unless the Commission has specific questions with respect to those other impacts. But we believe they'll likewise either be negligible or simply haven't been demonstrated. And unless there are further questions, we'll rest with our presentation.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the town manager has some information as to the slide that had some information about timing, just very briefly.
Yeah,
if you may
just quickly,
indulge us.
thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Pull a mic over.
Oh, sure. Members of the commission, thank you for your time. I think to respond to what TEC was saying, Mr. Dandry was saying, one of the reasons why, one of the core parts of our petition is that our traffic signals need to be upgraded to achieve the optimal timing and the flexibility in the timing that would be needed to not only handle the additional increases, excuse me, that are generated that are known and predictable by all the engineers' estimations, but also the episodic incidences that we highlight in the slide that have not really been studied at any level, which we are obviously deeply concerned about. And for better or worse, Long Meadow's traffic signal equipment is outdated. And so this additional demand on our road network, as highlighted by GPI, has really initiated this need to make these signal upgrades, and we simply are asking for a reasonable share of that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you very much. We will take this into consideration and be back to you as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. We're actually on schedule, but for having started late. So we'll take a quick break, and we will come back and pick up with Eastern States Exposition.